Hey guys, Kevin Bupp here, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow podcast. Our mission is to help you build and maintain massive amounts of cash flow through income producing real estate investments. Our guest for this week's show is real estate investment expert Jay Balekar. Now, Jay is the founding principal at Compounding Capital Group, which is a private real estate investment firm that operates multifamily communities in the Cincinnati, Ohio market. Jay is a successful business and technology leader, and he's got roots in the technology consulting space. And he started his real estate journey back in 2015, really to diversify his investment portfolio. And then Jay ultimately grew incredibly passionate about real estate after doing his first few multifamily repositioning deals, after realizing the true potential and power of real estate to create generational wealth, passive income, all the tax benefits that we know about, and also to create a positive impact on society by providing people with the most basic need of housing. And so, guys, I think, I'm excited to have Jay here on the show, but I'm more excited about, Jay's story, because at present time, Jay's been doing this now a little over 6 years. He's holding down a full-time job, all while building this multi-million dollar real estate portfolio. And I think that's quite impressive in and of itself. And so I'm excited to chat with Jay about all the things real estate, how he's built his portfolio, but also how he's been able to do that while maintaining a full-time W-2 job. And so with that, guys, it's my honor to welcome my guest for today's show, Jay Balekar. Jay, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you here. Excited to learn about you, your story, your background, and ultimately how you found your way into the real estate space. And so I gave you a brief introduction. I would love if you could maybe fill in the blanks for us all and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. And that was a great introduction, better than what I would have given myself, actually. So thank you for that. So, like you said, I started in real estate investing in actually roughly about 2020. So that's exactly when COVID happened. And before that, anything that I'd bought was really just personal investment real estate. It was not in an attempt to get cash flow or anything like that, just a personal home. And then I had a travel job working as an IT security consultant. And during these years, I was reading, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Bigger Pockets books, Rich Dad Academy books. And I was like, man, this is really doable. A lot of people are doing it. And got to do something. Otherwise, I'll be working my butt off until I'm 80, working for that paycheck. Nothing wrong with that, but always good to have options, right? Mm-hmm. So, what worked for our parents may not work for us because the economy is changing. We are moving towards gig economy and things like that. So after COVID happened, my travel stopped and I started working from home. I was like, this is the perfect opportunity to dive into a major real estate project that involves some amount of renovation and things like that. So in early 2020, that's when I bought my first investment property, which was an 8-unit here in Cincinnati, Ohio. It was a fantastic location, but extremely distressed property where we had to do essentially everything brand new, going down to the studs, all new plumbing, roofing, electrical, some framing. So essentially had to do everything brand new, but always had heard you can't go wrong with location. And that was proven right with this one. Because of course, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. We went significantly over budget in terms of renovation. But then because the location was not wrong, we were actually able to rent it out at a premium and still cash flow and pull our cash out after a cash out refi. So that's how it all kind of got started.
Okay, so that was an 8-unit property. And since then, you've done a number of other properties also, or JVing on some larger multifamily projects as well. Maybe give us some additional info on kind of what your business looks like today.
Yeah, absolutely. So after I did that 8-unit, that was kind of a proof of concept for me that this actually works. And at least for the first few deals, I didn't want to borrow any money from friends or family or from anybody really, because I had no track record, if you will. So I was just kind of rolling in my money, pulling the cash out after a cash out refi, rolling it that back again. So we built a small portfolio of about 30 units here in Cincinnati that we also self-manage. But after a certain point, you hit that mark where you don't have any more capital to invest, and you have to start working with a team and working with a group of investors to buy more real estate. And the other thing that I realized was when you actually work as a team, you're not doing everything yourself. So of course, you're not putting in all the money, but you're also not putting in all the time and effort. So
Yeah.
everything is shared, which is the biggest benefit of investing together with other people. And I think in retrospect, if there was one thing that I could change, I would probably start investing with other people in a group earlier than I did. So after we built our personal portfolio, we did about a 32 unit JV deal with two of my partners who I met through social media, networking, Bigger Pockets. And now we are closing on a 63 unit deal, also a JV, also with people I met through networking. And it's about 5-member JV. And then I've also invested as an LP in a syndication, about 85 doors.
Got it.
So, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, that's super exciting, Jay. And we're going to dissect a little bit of what that JV structure looks like. This, so folks that are listening, if they're just getting started in this journey and they want to go down this path, they have a better understanding of what that team framework looks like. But I'm going to back up a little bit before we get to that point in the show, and I want to talk about that foundational property, the 8-unit property that you purchased. And the interesting thing that you stated, and it's something that I hit on many times over and over again. It's you didn't want to risk anyone else's money. You wanted to do that very first one yourself. You wanted to prove the concept. And I think that's incredibly important, especially if you intend to get to a point where you're going to go out and actually start bringing in outside capital. And the responsibility that lays on your shoulders is it's an incredibly large one. And so I think it's of the utmost importance that before you go risking other folks' money, that you actually risk your own, because up until that point in time, your whole business model is just theory, right? There's no practical knowledge that is in place. It's just theory. It's whatever you learned going to networking groups, what you read in books, what you listen to in podcasts. But so I love every bit of that. I'm a huge fan and huge proponent of that model that you just outlined there. And so, but again, let's dissect this 8-unit, because prior to that, and correct me if I'm wrong, you didn't have a background in construction. It doesn't sound like you've remodeled homes yourselves. Maybe you've done some handyman projects around your own house and things like that. But this sounded like, even though it's an 8-unit property, it was a fairly large rehab. When you say down to the studs, that's a major rehab. And that's one that would scare most, even experienced rehabbers away, let alone someone doing their very first deal. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, maybe the, lessons learned, challenges that you faced along the way of getting this 8-unit property turned around and rented back out.
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. So I think, to be very honest, this first 8 units that we bought, I underestimated the amount of work it was going to need. Right? If I knew it was going to be down to the studs renovation, I would have probably not purchased it. But then I was so confident about the location that I was like, hey, even if we go a little bit over budget, and even if the property does not cash flow year 1, it will cash flow at least year 2. So that is something that I was pretty confident about. And at that point, it was just a side income or an income property for us. So we did not have major goals about, it's got a cash flow day 1 as soon as it's listed on the market, because really it was just our money, and we didn't have a whole lot of money that we had borrowed from friends or family that we had to repay. So there was some wiggle room. The other major thing that I think helped us was that we had enough capital to actually fund the rehab. So initially we thought it would be a $75,000 rehab. It turned out to be a $210,000 rehab.
Wow.
But we had enough line of credit on our primary residence plus enough cash and liquid to actually keep going, and we were able to fund that rehab. Because if I would have had no cash, I would have been forced to wholesale that property again, put it back on the market, and perhaps even lose some money on this, right? So those were definitely some of the experiences. But then when we found out that it's actually this much work, one of the books that was kind of helpful was Estimating Rehab Costs by Jay Scott. It's a Bigger Pockets book. That was at least helpful to understand the terminology. Of course, without any experience, you still can't get those estimates bang on. But at least I knew when the contractor talks about so-and-so term, what it actually means. At least I was able to wrap my head around that, given I had absolutely no experience in construction. And then the other thing that I did was I got bids, at least 5 to 6 bids for every little thing that we did. And I GC'd the work myself, just to have that more control over the project. So I did the project management, GC, all of that myself. I did not give any advance payments to contractors. That's another big one that I think saved me quite some money, because the contractors that I turned down and I told them, I'm not going to give you anything upfront, those were the ones that I found out later were the ones who had ran away with a lot of money from the other from
Oh
other
boy.
investors and
Yeah.
things like that. So so just doing that due diligence and then putting a solid contract together with as detailed as possible statement of work. So this was all lessons learned by reading different forums like Bigger Pockets and things like that I learned by reading about other people's mistakes. So
Hmm.
I think that's the best part today. Information is available freely on the internet. So you
Yeah.
can really learn from other people's mistakes, and you don't have to learn everything from your own mistakes.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And so, would you mind sharing some of the numbers and how that property, what you paid for it? I know that you went over budget with the rehab, but what you
Right.
paid for the original property, all in costs after rehab, and then what it looks like today. I'm assuming you've got all 8 units leased up. You probably were able to rent them for slightly higher than maybe what you'd originally put on the pro forma, given where we're at in this rental cycle and the demand for housing. But would you mind sharing some details with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Would be happy to. So these were 8 units, essentially two fourplexes, two quads right next to each other. So in terms of appraisals, it's still residential. We bought them at $50,000 a door, so 400,000 for 8 units,
Mhm.
and about 210,000 for rehab and holding costs. So all in, we were at 610, and it was a 6-month project. So after the project was done, when we bought the property, it was 50% vacant. So 4 units were occupied, 4 units were vacant. Essentially, the top floor was vacant because the roof was almost non-existent. So when it would rain, it would actually rain in the bedrooms on the top
Oh
floor.
gosh.
So it was pretty brutal. But
Was
then
there a
once
major
we
mold issue? Is that why you had to get down to the studs? Was there some mold happening behind the walls?
there was mold issue in a couple of units, so we had to tear down the drywall and put
Mhm.
all new drywall and things like that. But then the current rents when we bought the property, although it was 50% occupied, on the lower units, it was about $500 a unit were the rents for 1-bedroom units. And once we were all done, of course, we had to do all new exterior and interior. We were at about 925 in rents and 25 in rubs, so about 950 a unit. And we also converted one of the units to Airbnb, which cash flows even better. So all in all, that's where we ended up in terms of rents and total expenses, purchase plus rehab. Then we did a cash out refi, smack dab in the middle of COVID. So the banks were pretty conservative in terms of LTV and cash out refis. So I was only able to pull out, basically only able to do 65 LTV on the cash
Mhm.
out refi, but still able to pull a decent amount of cash and lock the interest rate at a pretty low interest rate percentage, and get all the 8 units leased up in roughly about a week's time. We leased it
Wow.
ourselves, yeah, and we self-manage the property right now.
What did it appraise for? And I know that this was it was kind of in a bad time with COVID. Banks were being conservative, but what did it appraise for? If you don't mind me asking, when that
Yeah,
time came.
so all in we were at 610 and it appraised for 725.
Okay, good deal.
So we are going through an appraisal again and trying to do a cash out refi again, because now we are seeing banks doing 80 LTV on the cash out refis.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
trying to pull out some more cash and lock in the interest rates for next 7 years. So that's the plan now.
All righty. Lessons learned on that one. I know you mentioned working with GCs, gaining some additional knowledge on that side of things and understanding the terminology and the language that GCs speak. But what else? What were some other lessons learned that you've carried over now to other investments that you've made?
Yeah, I think the lessons learned in general in any heavy lift type of a project is whatever you estimate the rehab cost is going to be, just assume it's going to be 2x. because there's always surprises, and the labor costs are going up, the material costs are going up, and it's very difficult to find people who would do quality work these days. So I think that's a good rule of thumb. I've learned it over 2 projects now, which were both heavy rehab projects, this one and the 10 unit that I did after this one too. It's just always good to have a pretty huge reserve in terms of heavy lift deals. So I think that was one of the biggest lessons learned. And have enough money raised. If you're doing this as a JV deal or a syndication deal, then you want to make sure that there is enough money raised for CapEx, because things always go wrong.
Mm-hmm. So the self-management, I know that you're a big fan of Bigger Pockets. You've listened to a lot of the podcasts, and I'd say the majority of folks out there would state you don't want to manage your own properties. Why did you decide to, basically go vertical with your property management up until, I think you said until you hit about 30 doors, and maybe you've outsourced it now, but just talk to me a little bit of why you guys made that decision to go that route versus outsourcing to a third-party management company.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. And a lot of people ask me that, and they think, hey, why are you worrying about property management? Why do you want to worry about tenants, toilet, and trash? That's the first thing that comes to people's mind. But I think there were 3 key reasons. One, I wanted to maximize my cash flow, right? So, because my eventual goal is to get out of my W-2 job, and I wanted to maximize that cash flow. So I would have lost 10 to 12% right away if I outsourced property management. Mm-hmm. 2, I wanted to learn the property management side of things. So that way, eventually, when I outsourced, I would know where I'm getting fooled. If somebody told me, hey, costed us $500 to replace this toilet, I'd be like, no, that's not true. I can get it done for $100. Just knowing how much it costs for different mm-hmm. pieces of the property management business. So that was number 2. And I think number 3 was really, I feel like it's not that much work if you're self-managing the property, if your property is in a good location, good neighborhood, and if it's already fixed up. So even though we are self-managing, we probably get 1 or 2 calls in a month that I outsource to my handyman or a maintenance guy anyway. So it's not like I'm actively doing a lot of work, or I'm always there with my tool bag fixing toilets, right? That's not how, at least, I'm running it. If this was in a class C or D neighborhood, I would probably not have self-managed. But mm-hmm. given where the location is, my tenant base is extremely nice. So there's absolutely no headaches. So if I don't have any headaches, then there's really no reason for me to outsource something that's not a headache for me.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important. You hit 2 points there that I think are pretty important, that I like to emphasize. Is number 1, it sounds like most of the properties that you own, you've done major rehabs on them. So all the mechanicals are updated, your roof is new, ACs probably are newer or are new, plumbing. I mean, it's just the things that typically give you problems and that break and cause those headaches ultimately are fairly newer in your units. And so that's a big part. They're in good locations. So you're attracting a different demographic, a different tenant base, which is typically, less demanding on the property management side. And then, I think the last thing that's incredibly important, especially when you're of that size, like you're at the size to where if you just have one really good relationship, or maybe 2, with a good all around general handyman, someone that can, kind of jack of all trades, but they do a little bit of plumbing, a little bit of electrical, they can do drywall, they can do, basic flooring, they can do all the basics, and they can do it pretty well. If you've got 1 or 2 of those folks and they're incredibly reliable, they show up when they say they're going to show up, they do the work, they do it at a fair price, that really is a huge saving grace. And it sounds like you have that individual, or you have that, a couple of those individuals maybe that you can rely upon when a tenant needs something. So that's critically important. If you didn't have that guy, and now you got to start calling around the different trades, and figuring out, calling in a plumbing company that you've never used before, calling an electrician that you've never used before, or calling a drywall contractor, or flooring contractor. If you had to piecemeal it together like that, it would be incredibly expensive. You'd probably end up losing money because of the lack of relationships. But anyway, it sounds like you have those, which is Very important.
And
So,
absolutely. And those were the relationships I built during the heavy lift rehab that I did.
yep.
Because I got about 5 to 6 bids for every little thing. And those were the people I'm still in touch with. That way, if anything breaks, if it's an HVAC issue or plumbing or electrical, at least I have those relationships built.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. So Cincinnati, Ohio, I know that's where, for the most part in that MSA, that's where you've been focusing all your efforts,
Right.
both, on the individual investment side in your own portfolio, but also in the JV deals that you're doing on some of these larger projects. Why
Mhm.
Cincinnati, Ohio? I know it's your backyard. I know that's where you live, but aside from that, are there other, driving factors that ultimately want you to stay in the Cincinnati MSA?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cincinnati MSA, what I found out is it's always in those top 25 markets to invest.
Hmm.
It never is in top 10. So it's never going to become like Phoenix, Arizona, or Tampa, Florida, or Dallas, or Austin, Texas. But it's always in that top 25 list, lingering around 18 to 20. And it never falls off that list. So that tells me it's always been a good market, and it's consistent in that way.
Hmm.
Two, I've been here 10 years. So I've seen in terms of industry diversification, there's manufacturing, there's huge amounts of healthcare, logistics. Amazon has built nation's largest distribution facility here in Cincinnati by the Northern Kentucky Cincinnati Airport. DHL has their largest facility anywhere outside of Germany here in Cincinnati. So it's a huge logistics hub, healthcare, manufacturing, P&G, Kroger. These companies are headquartered here. So these are pretty recession resistant industries. Even if there's a recession, you're still going to buy shampoo, you're still going to buy groceries, right? And healthcare is pretty recession resistant too. So all of those factors in general were a pretty positive sign. It's definitely a renter's economy. There's a huge demand for rental apartments, just like it is all throughout the US. And also, in general, Midwest gives you a good combination of appreciation and cash flow.
Hmm.
So we have pretty good cap rates. There is decent level of appreciation as well, and the cash flows are beautiful too. So I always wanted to invest in a market that gives me both appreciation and cash flow. So this market is definitely giving me that. So these were some of the reasons I think why
Yeah, fantastic.
Cincinnati.
No,
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I wanted to break down the mechanics of your JV structure, the team that you've now put together,
Mhm.
that ultimately is going to take you into these larger deals. Can you help our listeners understand? I think you had mentioned maybe there's a couple other. I don't know how many or you're doing JVs with on these other deals, but maybe break down the mechanics of who the rest of the team members are, what roles they hold, and then also maybe what role you hold with inside that team network.
Yeah, absolutely. So perhaps I can talk about the JV deal that we are about to close in roughly about a week's time. It's about
Mhm.
63 doors here in Cincinnati area, and we are about 6 people on the deal. So I brought the deal to the table. I'll be the boots on the ground responsible for stabilization of the deal. And essentially, in terms of investment in the deal, I'm rolling in the acquisition cost and a little bit of my own cash, roughly about 10 grand, right? So most of the capital is being brought in by my investors and other partners
Mhm.
who are based in California. So these are all tech executives. Their backyard is not the best market to invest in. So they were always looking for markets like the Midwestern market or Southeast for their investments. And these were some of the relationships that I had built through talking to people on different forums, Bigger Pockets being one of them, and just social media relationship building. So we had been in touch for about 8 months. We made a few offers on some of the other properties which didn't pan out. And finally, this deal came up and we underwrote it. I underwrote it with my partner as well, the other active partner on this JV deal. The numbers worked. And then he brought his friends to the table as well. And collectively, they raised the capital. I brought the deal. And that's essentially how the dynamics are going to work out.
Fantastic. And so is that property going to go inside your vertical property management infrastructure, or are you guys going to bring in a third party management firm?
No, we are bringing a third-party property management firm. 63 doors is a little bit too much for me to handle with my IT job. And also, I think I've heard from one of my mentors that, it's a great idea to self-manage until you have about 30 doors, outsource after that, and bring it back in once you cross 500. So that's kind of our vision, that once we cross a certain unit count, we want to bring property management back in-house.
Yeah, I think 30 numbers is about that point. I did this
Yeah.
way back in when I got started. This is back in like the early to mid 2000s. Once I hit that 30, 35 mark, I was out of time. No time left in the day. It was running me around. But a lot of my properties were, B minus C class properties. So it sounds like very, very different demographic maybe than what you're dealing with. And so it was quite challenging. And I found myself, not necessarily spending my time on the things that were going to allow me to, grow my company, that were the best use of my time. So that's when I made the shift to outsource the property management. So
Awesome.
I do think 30 is probably about that number. That's the threshold. But in any event, well, Jay, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you coming to the show. If you would tell the listeners, how they can, reach you, learn more about you. Where's the best place to find you?
Absolutely. I'm very active on Facebook. And we also have our company page on Facebook, Compounding Capital Group. And then my first name, which is actually Jaideep, Jaideep, last name Balekar, Balekar. Pretty active on LinkedIn as well. And then also through our website, which is compoundingcapitalgroup.com.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Jay, it's been a lot of fun having you. I appreciate you coming on, my friend.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kevin. It was a pleasure.
Alrighty, guys, that's all we have for this week's show. So until we meet again next week, this is your host, Kevin Bupp, wishing you huge success. Take care.